When Susan first became aware of the peculiar holes in her infant's nose, she experienced a total and utter panic attack. Soon after, she realized that she had no idea what could have possibly caused this or how potentially deadly it was. She had no notion what may have caused it. It was that very afternoon that she went to the doctor. But when the doctor looked at it, the message for Susan was not a good one. Aged 40 years old, Susan is a mother who goes it alone. When she had dated in the past, the relationship had never been successful. Her hope was that things will be different this time around, as it would be the first time that they would meet in person. She had invested a significant amount of time in preparing for the date, and she was very eager for it to go off without a hitch. However, there would be events that did not go as to plan. Despite the fact that she was aware that it was a long shot, she made the decision to meet up with the man she had met online. There was nothing particularly noteworthy about the date. He didn't appear to be much that interested in her child, whom Susan had from a previous relationship. It was not yet clear to her whether or not she would like to meet him again after the date. When Susan woke up the morning after her date, she found out that there was something peculiar about baby Roy. The fact that Roy kept scratching his nose gave the impression that he was suffering from a severe pain in his nose. However, it wasn't until she looked more closely that she realized the reason why his nose was hurting. It was so terrifying that she couldn't even get out of bed. What exactly was going on with her infant? On the inside of Roy's nose, there were a number of very small holes. When she took him closer, she noticed that the holes were literally pressing into his skin. At first, she thought that perhaps something had become stuck to his nose. But as she got closer, she changed her mind. Using her finger, she applied pressure to it, and Roy immediately began weeping. Undoubtedly, there was a problem. But what exactly was it? It was completely beyond her comprehension what she was going through. The well-being of her child was in jeopardy. So she made the courageous decision to contact the physician. On the same afternoon, the doctor's office scheduled a semi-emergency appointment for the affected individual. Despite the fact that there would be other people who would arrive before baby Roy, they assured her that they would definitely see her by the end of the day at the very latest. Susan was instructed by the physician to consider whether or not there was anything unusual or out of the norm that could have been the contributing factor in this. In order to determine exactly what was wrong, it would be of enormous assistance to the doctor. Following her agreement to give it some thought, Susan hung up the phone. In what way may this have occurred? In all honesty, she was clueless. During the past week, Susan reflected about the past week. None of the things that she and her child had done were particularly out of the usual. Several days before, they had gone on a walk through the woods during their time together. It would not have been difficult for the infant to come into contact with something out there, such as a contaminated piece of moss or a mushroom. The thought of anything that was out of the ordinary was tough to come up with. There wasn't much that Susan did outside of going on occasional hikes and going to the coffee shop in the neighborhood. She was a typical girl. Because she worked from home, she didn't spend much time outside. It was true that she was a dull individual. On the other hand, she suddenly realized that there was something else that was really unusual. Before that, Susan had gone out on a date the night before. After a period of time spent conversing with a man on the internet, she ultimately made the decision to meet him in person. Susan had been looking forward to restarting her dating life. As of yet, she had not discovered her true love. and she was holding out hope that this date would be successful. Nonetheless, things took a turn that was not anticipated. From the very beginning of the date, Susan had the impression that there was something peculiar about the man. He did not appear to be really interested in either her or her child. As a single mother, she was almost as if he looked down on her and detested her. However, as soon as she began to think so, he would exhibit behavior that demonstrated his level of investment in the situation. Simply put, it was an intriguing date. Nevertheless, there was much more to it. Upon reflection, Susan was unsure of the reason he had even attempted to get in touch with her in the first place. As she went over her interactions with him, she became increasingly aware of the fact that he did not value her as a particular person. Because she was feeling a little desperate. She wasn't thinking very clearly at the time. Is it possible that he is involved in more than one of these things? Susan could not fathom how he could possibly be involved in any way with it. They hadn't engaged in any kind of physical contact. And she hadn't communicated with him since the previous evening. In addition, he had not sent her a message. In the event that he had carried out such action, wouldn't he have made a statement? Even though Susan was uncertain, it was time for Roy to have his appointment. It was necessary for her to leave. While waiting in the waiting area at the doctor's office, Infant Roy was receiving an excessive amount of attention from the staff working there. At this point, the holes in his nose were quite obviously visible. And everyone who was in the vicinity of him was taken aback by what they were seeing. Susan didn't pay much attention to it until the rest of the people's curiosity became more and more noticeable. It was only after entering his office that the physician was able to get a good look at Roy's nose. And he was taken aback by what he saw. Prior to this, he had never witnessed anything such as this. In the event that he had, he would remember it. Something like this is not something that one would simply forget. And what's even more peculiar is that the physician had never ever come across anything like to this in his medical books. He lacked any insight. During the time that they were waiting for the results of the tests that the doctor had requested for Susan, he scrutinized Roy's nose in great detail. While before, baby Roy had been sobbing. The unusual thing was that he had stopped crying. Then again, he did not anymore. Every single part of his nose was entirely numb. Susan made the decision that she needed some fresh air and went to the toilet. While she was gone, she allowed her baby to settle down and sleep. When Susan was away, the doctor received a message from the forum that was intended for private viewers. He quickly opened it, expecting that it would contain the solution that he had been looking for. It was. Much to his detriment. Not only did the communication contain the information that he needed, but it also delivered depressing news. And everything would have to be altered very quickly. Another physician had, in fact, observed this condition in the past. And if they did not take action as soon as possible, it had the potential to become a significant issue for everyone, including Susan. In a state of heightened anticipation, Susan's physician awaited the arrival of the test results, which arrived nearly immediately after he had read the message from the forum. This was the end. As soon as he received the results, he felt a chill run down his spine. Indeed, the other physician had been correct. After Susan's doctor left his office, the entire location quickly descended into a state of disarray. After Susan had finished using the loo, She saw that Roy's nose was not looking very good. It appeared as though the holes were beginning to spread to other parts of his nose. At this point, Susan was experiencing a great deal of fear. But she was aware that she needed to demonstrate it to the physician. There was only one issue. And that was the fact that the door she had just entered had been locked from the outside entrance. They were unable to escape the confines of the room. She was able to hear the doctor telling other people that he had called the police, which made the situation even more difficult for her. Susan, who was already anxious and frightened, became more and more concerned as she observed the responses of the professionals to Roy's condition. What exactly was the problem? Would her child end up passing away? Her head was filled with a million different things at the moment. Despite her best efforts, she was finally unable to maintain her composure. After being kicked a few times, the door lock finally snapped, and the door opened up. As the individuals on the opposite side began to scream, Susan's physician disengaged himself from the situation. Susan stood there, holding her breath heavily. Although it had been difficult to force the door open, she was in desperate need of answers. She needed someone to explain to her what was going on at this very moment. While Susan's doctor instructed everyone else to go, he instructed Susan to remain in the same location. During this time, she should avoid getting too close to anyone. The look of terror on the doctor's face conveyed to Susan all the information she required regarding the future of both her and her unborn child. However, Susan was fully committed. She informed them that she would not remain in the area unless they provided her with their responses. Susan was recognized by 3 armed officers who entered the building before her physician could even begin to articulate his thoughts. Susan became the target of the doctor's yelling as he pointed at her. And it was they. Susan, who was beginning to feel faint, was the target of scrutiny as all 3 officers pulled out their firearms and leveled them carefully at her. I could not understand what was going on. As soon as Susan became aware that the police were concentrating their attention on her, she hastily raised her hands into the air. She was on the edge of tears, pleading with them to simply tell her what was going on when she saw them. By this point, the holes that had been present on baby Roy's nose had spread to cover over half of it. The police gave her a strong warning to remain in the area. Susan was informed by one of the cops, who was attempting to maintain his composure, that they would provide her with all of the information, but that she and her infant needed to be isolated immediately. It was clear that her physician was rattled, and he apologized for not explaining it sooner. He acknowledged that he had been terrified. The fact that someone came in with a flesh-eating virus was not something that happened every day, and he had to follow procedures that he had never dealt with before. In spite of the fact that he felt terrible about the way everything had been handled, there was more. The doctor talked to Susan about the activities that she had been participating in the previous day. That evening, Susan had gone on a date after going on a walk earlier in the day. It was fortunate for her that the ineffective date had not been the reason for this. Instead, it seemed more possible that toddler Roy had come into contact with a plant that was diseased while they were out hiking. So which one is it? Although the infant would have to be kept in isolation for a period of time, Susan was fortunate enough to find that the hospital had the medication that they required. The necessity of having a conversation with Susan over her walk was the reason that the police became involved. As soon as they saw her outside of the isolation room, they went into a state of fear, which was a direct result of her doctor's panic. What a huge mess it was. On the other hand, there was more. The law enforcement authorities had blocked off the hiking trail. And after conducting a thorough investigation, they discovered a plant that was not indigenous to the region. Based on the results of the tests, it was determined to be the root of the issue. The plant was severed from its roots and thrown away without delay. To our great relief, there have been no other cases since then. Within the span of 1 month, Susan and Roy had made a full recovery, and she was prepared to resume her dating engagements. Do you have any thoughts after witnessing the story that was just presented to you? In the comments section, you are welcome to contribute your thoughts and opinions. If you liked what you saw, please give our channel a like, subscribe to it, and share it with others. All of the story for today are finished. Wait until we meet again.